My name is Christine Cassie and I'm the CEO for the Chinook Sexual Assault Centre. We also have the program called Chinook Child and Youth Advocacy Centre that's just opened to the public. I'm here today with Sarah Jean Sarmaz, who's one of our system navigators and education specialists. So if you have real tough questions, they actually will go to her at the end. How's that sound? So just to let you know a little bit about us, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. So I am a settler on the traditional territories of the people of the Siksikatsitsapi, or the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, the nations make up Siksikatsitsapi are the Kainai, they're the blood tribe, the Piikani Nation, the Siksika Nation in the southern Alberta, as well as the Blackfeet tribe in northern Montana. As both the traditional and current land keepers of this area, the Blackfoot nations have welcomed people from other Indigenous territories, including all signatory nations of Treaty Number 7, the members of the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and non-Indigenous people who've come to call this area home. Every time we talk about sexual assault, we have to start with a trigger warning. We know people have either experienced, are supporting someone who's experienced, or know somebody who's experienced sexual assault. And sometimes, even if you don't have any of that within your life, just the very topic of talking about sexual assault can stir emotions for people. So these are some QR codes that you could, hook into your phone, but we want you to take some time, just breathe deep. Take care of yourself during the presentation. If you need to walk away for a moment to collect your thoughts, you're welcome to do that at any time. So when we talk about sexual violence, we actually talk about it on a continuum from things like street harassment all the way to incest. So sexual assault is not just one specific behavior, but a range of behaviors which are unwanted and violating to the victim. Sexual assault is always a method of domination and control. As we attempt to identify and recognize sexual violence, we must think beyond the specific instance of rape or sexual assault because there are a variety of sexual behaviors that constitute forms of sexual assault. The sexual assault continuum was created to represent the set of behaviors, some of which our society accepts or endorses more than others, like street harassment. That cat calls is something cute. It's just a guy showing that they like you. Though rape and incest are almost universally regarded as unacceptable in our society, some of the behaviors at the other end of the spectrum, like street harassment, are often overlooked or even tolerated, which makes it easier for perpetrators of sexual violence to advance from one behavior to another. We also, this is from the World Health Organization, but we also look at sexual violence when it comes to socio-ecological factors that impact sexual assault. So when we look at things like from an individual basis, so what contributes to sexual assault or sexual violence within our society? Individual factors contain things like use of alcohol and drugs, if there's coercive sexual fantasies or other attributes or beliefs that support sexual violence. Relationship factors are things like a family environment that's characterized by physical violence and few resources. So if we see a lot of domestic violence, you're likely going to see some sexual violence within the household. If there's an emotionally unsupportive family environment, it makes it very uncomfortable for people to come forward and to actually talk about sexual assault and things that have happened. Community factors that contribute to sexual violence in our society are things like if we have a general tolerance of sexual assault within the community, or if we have weak sanctions against perpetrators of sexual violence. And overall, societal factors are things like norms that are supportive of sexual violence, where we think it's okay to be sexually violating other people. If we are buying into things like male superiority or sexual entitlement, and if there's weak laws or weak consequences from our laws, those all help to support sexual violence within our society. So what we know, unlike the myths that have been supported throughout the years, sexual assault or sexual abuse or rape, whatever term you want to give it, is not about sex or attraction. It's motivated by power and control and is a crime of violence against a person's body and will. Sexual assault perpetrators target, test, and groom victims and use psychological and physical tactics to victimize individuals. So how big of a problem do you think sexual violence is in our community? Huge. That's a good answer. Not the answer we all want to hear, right? So from the International Chiefs of Police, they said that research and experience inform us that sexual assault is one of the most underreported violent crimes in our society and one of the only violent crimes in Canada that has not decreased in the last decade. Yeah. So in Canada, the picture is 3 in 10 women aged 15 years and older have been sexually assaulted at least once since the age of 15. 52% of perpetrators were an acquaintance, family member, friend, neighbor of the victim, someone that had some familiarity and even some trust. And the likelihood of being a victim is similar across all the provinces and territories. Risk factors with higher likelihood of victimization include people that have a history of homelessness, a history of childhood victimization, binge drinking or drug use. So this is where you see those higher percentages of victimization that happen between the ages of 15 to 24 because kids are experimenting more. They're going off to college and university. Woohoo! Mom and dad aren't there to tell me what to do. So now we're going to get involved in all sorts of things. So there's far more risk behaviors that happen. Sexual assault is more prevalent amongst women, but even more so if you identify as Indigenous, as 2S LGBTQ+, or you have some form of disability, be it an intellectual disability or a physical disability. Yes.
What is 2S LGBT?
So that would be two-spirited, lesbian, gay, transgendered. You're welcome. So there's a higher risk of sexual assault noted amongst those that were women, young, Indigenous, single, homosexual or bisexual, those who had poor mental health or disabilities. In addition, individuals that had certain experiences of childhood abuse and homelessness, and even those that have evening activities outside of the home. So for any of us that may be going to school at night or to work at night or for social activities, they also have a higher risk of sexual assault. And although women and children are still primary targets, we know that men also experience sexual violence. So what we know is that sexual violence impacts all ages, however people identify, women, men, 2S LGBTQ+, and across ethnic and religious classes. It's safe to say it's not a women's issue, but one that belongs to society as a whole. What it also tells us, as stated best by Tarana Burke, who is the founder of the Me Too movement, is that vulnerability has become synonymous with permission and that bodily autonomy is not seen as a basic human right. We fail to recognize the power that can often equate to privilege and create an incredible imbalance in our society. So if we bring it closer to home, ASAS, I sometimes call it the mothership. That is the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services. They did a prevalence study, research study, and it was released back in January of 2020. In Alberta, they found that from their study that 2 in 3 females and 1 in 3 males have experienced sexual abuse in their lifetime. Overall, a 34% prevalence rate. Of all survivors surveyed, 75% were first abused as children. Of those, 50% also experienced sexual assault as an adult. So if we consider the current population of children in Alberta and use the 34% prevalence rate from the study, we can estimate that the number of children who are currently experiencing childhood sexual abuse in Alberta is about 325,000, which is enough to make your stomach sink, right? Your heart sink. This was a study that was replicated from about 35 years ago and had exactly the same findings. Of interest, there was a CBC, podcast that was on last week in the afternoon. They were talking about the dark ages, so 400 years ago, and what was happening with sexual assault, because there was sexual assault crimes, there were sexual assaults that were reported. And they found then it was about a 10% conviction rate, and now we're at about a 12% conviction rate. So over 400 years, we haven't really improved. I know, again, a sad stat. CSAC stands for the Chinook Sexual Assault Center. So we opened our services on January 7th of 2019. As of the end of December, we've seen about 1,000 people. 200 of those were children, and we've seen an additional 57 children through our Child and Youth Advocacy Center.
I was 22 when I was raped.
I was 19. I was 20.
I didn't report it for, 1,000 reasons, a million reasons.
It was somebody I was involved with.
It was a friend of a friend.
My drug dealer.
Met this photographer by myself.
I got very drunk. I met some guy in this bar.
He started trying to kiss me and I said no.
He takes my left leg and raises it on his shoulder.
He went to put his hand in my panties and I tried to kind of deflect his hand, and that's when he slapped my hand away.
I blacked out.
I was fighting pretty hard at this point, just saying no, please don't, please don't.
I came to.
Internally, I was shaking. I was really trying to look as calm as possible.
And I could tell that something that I hadn't wanted to happen happened.
He held me down and he forced himself inside me.
I was being pleasant and nice just so I could remain safe and get out of there.
And I kind of just ran out into the street with my pants on inside out and my shoes off.
And he sat up and he looked at me, and that was, I guess, the scariest moment for me, because I could tell he was deciding whether he was actually going to stop or not, and that was the moment that I realized that I had thought I was in control of a situation that I was not in control of at all.
And I blame myself for putting myself in that situation.
I knew that I had no proof.
I could hear people's judgment saying, well, why did you do that? It was your fault.
I was still in like physical pain from this and sitting there going, oh, well, no one's gonna believe me.
It was my word against his.
Everyone was just gonna go, this girl just, you know, slept with this guy and changed her mind.
I wasn't the perfect victim.
I figured, who's gonna believe some cokehead college girl?
I didn't like try to fight him off, or I didn't slap him around, or, you know, I didn't pick up the phone and call 911.
I didn't know that I was important enough to draw boundaries around what people could and couldn't do with my body.
Who wants to come forward with the literal most violating thing that can happen to you, relive it, and then have people telling you that you're making it up?
And I thought I would just be better off trying to put this behind me.
I couldn't imagine pressing charges and then having to sit in a courtroom and look at his face over and over.
I thought, well, you know, that's like giving him what he wants. Like, I'm spending more time on him, or spending more energy on this.
I imagine, and I think rightfully so, that it would have been more traumatizing for me in many ways had I reported it.
It's up to a survivor to decide what they do with their story. It's up to them if they want to report it or not.
I don't want this to be a part of who I am.
I hated myself a lot at the time.
We are violated, we are harassed, we are touched, we're trapped, we're scared. And we just take a chip on the shoulder and we keep our lives going, and that's not fair to us.
And I think it would be wrong to tell them that they don't get to decide what happens next.
Hopefully it doesn't go on to another video. So what were you thinking when you heard these women speak? For me, it's always the young woman that describes herself as that cokehead college student and didn't see that she was worth anything. That every time I choke up, whenever I hear that line, that someone would actually feel that their life isn't of as much value of someone else. And that during the assault, that all these people are discounting that they're going to be believed because we've invested centuries in not believing victims. So, and this isn't uncommon. We hear this at the center all the time, that they didn't report because it was going to be my word against him. I'm going to be labeled a liar, a slut. I reported once before, but I wasn't believed. I told my mom I wasn't believed. So our first reaction to any disclosure that we get, be it a call, a note of some sort. Sometimes we had our office manager was down on Main Street, but she had her name tag on. Someone actually came up to her and gave her a disclosure. Oh, you're from the sexual assault center. This is what happened to me. Our first response always has to be about belief. Because it's not up to us to investigate, but that we believe, so that we make it easier for them to talk and to report and to get their needs met. So contrary to the stereotype of real rape as an assault by a stranger committed with a weapon or using physical force, research and law enforcement experience demonstrate that the following represents some of the most realistic dynamics of sexual assault crimes. So most sexual assault victims are acquainted with the suspects in some way, yet rarely expected intimacy with that suspect. Most victims do not report sexual assault to law enforcement authorities. Men are even less likely to report sexual assault to the police than are women because of the shame is greater. And in fact, when I don't know how many of you saw Spotlight, because I'm going to reference that a little bit later. It's on, I want to say on Prime. Maybe I'm not supposed to be advertising that. It's based on actual events, but it was the Boston Globe that wrote extensive stories on the Catholic Church and the sexual assaults that were happening between priests and children, and how many of them actually targeted boys. And not because they identified as being homosexual, but because they knew the shame that would come with that the boys were less likely to come forward and make reports. Spotlight. It's an excellent film. Victims rarely report to police first. They usually go to a close friend, a relative, a healthcare provider, or a victim advocate. So even seeing I keep saying the dignified space that you have here is, I wish we would have seen this before we did our center. This is beautiful. But even having your room where then the men can go in and choose some clothes, the women can go choose some clothes, the women can get some self-care with some makeup and things like this. What great opportunities, because it's those fleeting moments of trust is when we tend to get people making disclosures about things, either domestic violence or sexual violence. And you've created a great space here to create that safety for them to be able to do that. So just, yeah, nothing but respect. Many women are victims of repeated rape and sexual assaults. Victims often delay reporting a sexual assault for days, weeks, months, or even years later, and may never disclose it to anyone, including their closest friends. Police are more likely to be notified of sexual assaults that are committed by strangers. That's when you're going to see it in the news. That's when they're going to go in. Stalking, monitoring, and surveillance are often precursors to sexual assault. So even when we hear of something happening in a bar, sometimes when we talk about those types of terms, we think that people may be stalking houses or stalking for weeks on end. It might just be that evening that they've actually picked their prey in a bar and they're going to be stalking. They might do some drugs in the drink, whatever that is. Sexual assault perpetrators rarely use weapons and rarely use physical force, relying instead on verbal threats, intimidation, manipulation, and exploitation of the victim's vulnerabilities. Victims' emotional reactions are going to vary from confusion, shame, and embarrassment, and the whole range. And victims may lie, or not really lie, but understate the specifics of a sexual assault because they fear that their actions may have contributed in some way, which is what you're talking about, to the sexual assault itself. And trauma of victimization can increase chances for substance abuse, sleeping or eating disorders, mental health issues, inappropriate sexual behavior, suicide, or running away. So we often see with young people that we might see them not coming home at night. We might see them having far more sexual partners than they would have, 3 months previous. Because again, their value for themselves has really been diminished. Few victims are physically injured to the point of emergency medical attention where that's needed. Alcohol and drugs are involved in a very high percentage of sexual assaults. And individuals who've previously been victimized may be unable to defend themselves due to the past trauma that the assault triggers in the current assault. We expect victims to remember details when they've experienced significant personal trauma. Sexual assault victims commonly struggle with a range of emotions that make it difficult for them to report or disclose the abuse. Often victims who do report will delay in doing so for a variety of reasons that are connected to the neurobiological and psychological responses of the assault. For example, victims may struggle to remember precise details of the assault and experience negative feelings when doing so. So how many of you remember the trial of Jian Ghomeshi? So, one of the things that got him off was that she couldn't remember the color of the car. This is really typical for victims, to not remember colors, to not remember certain things. Our brain does some pretty magical things to protect ourselves during the assault. And how we respond to trauma, you've all heard of fight, flight, or freeze. Sorry, I had to look at the expert over here on that. But those are real things that happen. And so it doesn't maintain the same type of memories, and they may come back in bits and pieces. They'll struggle to remember precise details of the assault, exaggerate negative feelings when doing so. Victims may worry about reporting, how that reporting will affect their family or friends, and they may be fearful of family fracture. So if it is a relative that does it, they don't want to break up the family. What's going to happen at Easter dinner? What's going to happen at Christmas time? This person's a support to my mom. How can I do that? In addition, completing the forensic exam or the sexual assault kit can be a struggle for victims. For example, answering personal questions during an intensive physical exam and evidence collection prevents some victims from pursuing a criminal justice resolution. So delays in disclosures or reporting. So many factors that go into that, but again, victims may minimize the incident that occurred. The reasoning behind the delayed report has the potential to lead to additional charges for the suspect regardless of when the report is made, and there's an obligation to do a thorough investigation because there could have been coercion and threats that have been made. We see, especially with social media, we see a lot of threats online or through text messaging and things like this. If they have pictures, the threat of putting it out there and embarrassing them in front of their friends and family. But it's really quite normal that they're going to be not talking about it right away. Our police and court reality. So we've heard already through the video, and we've heard from the people that we deal with, and I'm sure you've heard from people that you've supported as well, that even during the assault, they're already discounting that they're going to be believed. So victims' reluctance to report sexual assault to police is frequently reinforced by the negative and sometimes traumatizing experiences described by other victims who've spoken with police or with other institutions, or that have participated in the criminal justice system. Even those that have had positive experiences with police may describe other negative experiences with the criminal justice system. So if you imagine with COVID and all the delays that have happened, we've seen court cases that have been delayed by months. So every time they get worked up that it's going to happen, now it's been delayed again. So it doesn't seem like justice is ever going to come. Sometimes you see what happens with the sentencing, and sentencing in Canada is always much less. It's not law and order. That's the first thing we have to tell people. You aren't going to see 25 years to life for a sexual assault in Canada. You barely get that for murder in Canada. Yeah. And so we know it's really hard for people to come forward, but we also know that victims come forward and they want to report usually so that it doesn't happen to somebody else. It's never really about themselves and their own part of justice. It's really about what they want to do to help others. So 1 in 5 victims of sexual assault experience some form of victim blaming in our systems. A vast majority of assaults do not come to the police, and so it's actually estimated at 83% do not come to policing services. In 2017, just over 24,600 across Canada were reported to police. And fewer than 42% of sexual assault cases in adult criminal court result in a guilty verdict. And sexual assault account for 10% of all violent self-reported incidents in Canada. So this is a great graphic. So a question we're usually asked is about, lying about sexual assault. Research indicates that lying about being sexually assaulted is actually rare. It ranges from 2 to 6% of false accusations, and it's no greater than any other crime. So social media exploded following revelations that there were discrepancies in a Rolling Stone story of an alleged gang rape at the University of Virginia. Using the hashtag #IStandWithJackie, Twitter users rallied around a woman whose story came under attack after the magazine's statement that its trust in her was misplaced. Among the tweets being circulated was this jarring graphic back in 2012. The determination that a reported sexual assault is false can only be made if evidence establishes that no crime was committed or attempted. And this determination can only be made after a thorough investigation has been completed. A report should not be labeled false as a result of the initial victim interview or perceived victim reaction. It is important not to confuse false allegations with unsubstantiated allegations. A report can only be deemed false when supported by evidence that the crime was not committed. Further, we should never conclude that a victim who recants or is reluctant to prosecute has falsely complained. There may be many reasons that the victim may not wish to pursue a complaint. The victim may be overwhelmed by the traumatic event, feel disbelieved by the criminal justice system, or fear having the details of the assault in the public sphere. In cases where the suspect is known to the victim, there may also be intimidation or fear of retaliation. According to Dr. David Lysak, who is a forensic consultant and trainer and lecturer on sexual assault, one of the most important characteristics of non-stranger rapists, and the one that has enormous implications for sexual assault response and investigation, is that the majority of rapists are serial offenders. This information highlights the need to thoroughly and aggressively investigate all reported cases of sexual assault based on the fact that there is a likelihood that the perpetrator is a serial offender who has committed prior assaults and who will sexually assault again in the future. Usually, men, especially in groups when we talk, tend to feel a lot of shame for what's happening and feel blame that, we're seeing all men as doing this. It's like a small percentage of men who do this, but they do the vast majority of crimes. And that's why it's important that we address this, because they have a lot of victims. So what this graphic is showing is how many maybe rapists in the States, how many reported, how many face trial, and the very small percentage that get jailed. And that's even in the States. No different. So again, why victims come forward? How public do you want it to be? If you don't feel that you're going to have that support, they may not come forward. So ideal victims. And again, society has conditioned us to believe the ideal victim. These are, of course, unrealistic expectations for us to have. They do not represent how most people who are sexually assaulted actually cope and respond. As a result, these myths and biases, these assumptions and expectations interfere with how victims' stories, reports, and even their testimony about their experiences is heard and understood by helpers in the field, parents, colleagues, friends, or in sexual assault trials, and how the legal actors in the criminal justice system and others assess their credibility. And we have to remember that determining if sexual assault is real is tangled up in our decades of rape culture, where we are set on blaming victims. We have heard or read the stories in news reports. A young woman meets a guy on Tinder, they meet for dinner, have a few drinks, she accepts a ride home from him and is sexually assaulted. Our first instinct is to question, why meet a stranger? We judge. Tinder can't be trusted. I've seen the movie. Why were you drinking? How drunk were you? Why would you drive with him alone? What were you wearing? We always feel the need to have that confidence that this is a real victim. So let's think about this. Because we see victims as helpless, paralyzed, or if you weren't those things, if you didn't want sex, you would have fought back. There would be injuries. We move to judgment. Even the victims, as we've heard, and the perpetrators do this. The victim who self-blames starts to believe that they're part of the cause of the assault, and the perpetrator will rationalize their crime to excuse and convince self and others that they were irresistible and charming, and it was just an innocent misunderstanding. In essence, we've reduced victims to things or objects as one-dimensional. We fail to see that they were rational and did all they could to survive the attack. We fail to provide the same care of understanding on how we respond when we are in a state of fear. We fail to understand the impact of trauma on our functioning. Thinking a victim of sexual violence can recall all the details of the crime or recall anything in absence of emotion. We fail to see the manipulation of the offender, the coercion, the threat, and the crime. It's only been really in the past few years that we've seen the advancement of trauma-informed care. And really, I've been in the field now for 38 years, and it really, I would say, the last 10, 15 years is when we start talking about trauma-informed care. And really, in the last probably 7, that we really dove deep into that. But our thoughts precede our actions, and so all forms of violence start from attitudes and beliefs and a justification of these beliefs. So sexual assault is based on power and control and stems from our thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes that belittle and dehumanize the person who has experienced the crime. These beliefs reflect those who are valued in our society and those who are not. So we see that. That's why you see higher numbers with the Indigenous population, why you see higher numbers with those that identify as 2S LGBTQ, why we see even higher numbers with an aging population, why we see higher numbers with people with disabilities, because we actually dehumanize them. We see them for the disability, we don't see them for the person. These same beliefs are often used to discriminate against or oppress other people that have experienced marginalization in our society. To help perpetuate victim blaming by the use of judgments, we have been well developed in rape myths and subsequent victim blaming. If we look at how many of you watched the Kavanaugh hearings when do you remember that? Back in the Trump days? Yes, yeah. So some of us were transfixed on those hearings when Dr. Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh offered contrasting notes of what happened. Dr. Ford's understated testimony served as a stark reminder of the gender dynamics and of the mental gymnastics required of women who speak up. Judge Kavanaugh's was a blistering defense in which he denounced a partisan frenzy bent on destroying his nomination. The president mocked Dr. Ford at a campaign rally to thunderous cheers and separately said it was a very scary time for young men in America because of what he described as the erosion of due process when it comes to sexual misconduct claims. And this is where we actually saw a real backlash against the Me Too movement as well. For too long, we have allowed slut-shaming characterizations of how one identifies sexually, excuse behaviors because he has a career ahead of him, and because, after all, the victim got herself that drunk. Or it happened so long ago, just forget about it. We've heard that time and time again from people. Our society has done an excellent job at encouraging behavior that's dangerous and in masking the crime of sexual assault by placing blame on the victim. We have a detrimental theme of victim blaming that exists within the realms of sexual violence and is unparalleled when compared to other criminal situations. So just think about it. Someone breaks into your home and steals your big screen TV. Will you get blamed for showing a little too much? The drapes are open after all. You just wanted me to see that big screen, right? You left the door unlocked and went to your neighbors for a coffee. I mean, you were asking. You wanted me to take it. And now that I took it, now you're crying thief. We would never do that for a break and enter, but we'll do that for a sexual assault. Every time. It's instinctual that we blame the victim of sexual assaults. But maybe blaming the victim makes this world a little bit more palatable, because to accept that such evil exists makes us all vulnerable. So we need to address that vulnerability and our complacency. For some of us, we grew up in a time when rape was not talked about. Child abuse was denied. And girls, I don't know how many of you went in high school when a girl was there one week and wasn't there the next because she was pregnant. She was shuttled off. Never to be heard from again. Life had changed. So how could we love, admire, or envy a criminal? How could I have known? What if someone I know and respect gets accused? Because we deal with that. People put themselves in positions to have access, right? We just had a teacher that in the 1980s, some pretty horrible sexually assaultive behavior at the Calgary School Board. And I think there's now a $40 million lawsuit against the Calgary School Board because other teachers knew and administration knew and did nothing about it. Right? So we pretend that we don't understand consent and we make it the role of the victim to explain and to prove that they said no. Just a few years ago, former federal court judge Robin Camp asked a woman why she couldn't just keep her legs together, as if that would have prevented her rape. Worse, as if victims were responsible for the rape. Because you are drunk, because you parked where there was poor lighting, because you were at a party, because you trusted someone, because you were dating someone, because you didn't learn self-defense, or because you learned self-defense but you froze when the attack was taking place, because you accepted a ride home, because you wore that short dress, because you just wished it would stop, does not make you responsible for your victimization. The only one responsible is the person who assaulted you. So thinking of being able to rise above these shaming statements, how strong is that person to make that call or to tell you about what they've been through? Because we've battered this home for years about blaming them. So when they trust you in that fleeting moment, they're pretty strong. They're really strong. They're taking a big risk. So what's our role in stopping this type of victim blaming? What energy do we spend in training to be able to interject or to talk up when we hear these statements from our colleagues, from police, from our friends, or from family? I was at this is pre-COVID, I was at a Halloween party in my neighborhood, and someone made just a horrific joke that involved a minority and sexual assault. The room went quiet, so everybody knew it was wrong. And of course, I had to say something. And I said, that's not funny. We don't talk about people like that, and sexual assault is never funny. Well, it was just a joke, like lighten up, Christine. Nope, it's not a joke. It's not funny, it's damaging. So I haven't been invited back, which is okay with me, but the point was made. And sometimes, we can do it nicely when people say things. We just correct the language, much like we do. I did some work with another group, and my husband's actually originally from Trinidad, and someone used like a common saying that used to be used in the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? And used it, and they looked at me and said, "Oh, I guess we don't use that word anymore." No, we don't, but thanks for recognizing that. That's great. There's no need to get bent out of shape. There's a way that we can reconstruct it and help them move on, right? Because it's all about education at that point. So who are the perpetrators? Really, they can be any gender, sexual orientation, or age, but we do know the majority are male. They can have any relationship with the victim or no relationship with the victim, and they may use physical force with psychological and emotional coercion tactics. In a 2002 study by Lysak and Miller, they added to a growing body of research that indicates that a significant percentage of sexual violence, perhaps 50 or 60%, is perpetrated by a tiny percentage of men. These are men who use alcohol, manipulation, and overt physical violence or threats of violence, like twisting an arm or holding someone down, to rape. These men rarely are exposed and even more rarely go to face formal sanction or prosecution for their actions. They hide in the cover of rape culture, knowing that few victims will ever speak out because of the hell that they will face for doing so. Thus, if we want to expose these perpetrators, we must start by believing and supporting survivors. The more support survivors receive from their families, friends, and communities and institutions, the less cover perpetrators of sexual violence will have. And the more survivors feel supported and believed, the more perpetrators will face social and legal sanction. So this is the power of Me Too, because when people started to talk, you saw this flooding. In fact, we saw a massive increase in policing reports during that time. It started to calm down a bit now again, because we do see across Canada there is, and across North America, really across the world, that there is a distrust with police, right? So things are being questioned. So we're hoping that we can change some of that as well.
We need to take a statement so we can establish what happened on Saturday night.
What time did you get back to David's flat?
What time? I don't know.
Can you give us an estimate?
I don't remember.
Would your pals remember what time you left the club?
He seemed nice.
She didn't remember much, did she?
I know. And now we've got to waste more time on a daft lecture. We know how to deal with victims. We've had years of experience.
Well, some of us have had more years than others.
I'm in my prime, I'll have you know.
That'll be right.
Today's session is about trauma. The latest in brain science will help you in your work. I'll start with a tour of the parts of the human brain. The reptilian brain maintains basic bodily functions. The limbic system is also instinctive. It deals with fear and pleasure, For example, you pat a dog, it senses pleasure, and without thinking, wags its tail. The neocortex is the site of logic, imagination, planning, and control. It's more sophisticated, but because it's conscious, it's slower than the older parts of the brain. The amygdala is a key part of the limbic system. It has one job: to sense danger and set off the alarm. When it's a matter of survival, the primitive parts of the brain override the conscious part. There are 3 possible survival responses: fight, flight, or the one that people don't think of, freeze. When the alarm goes off, blood and oxygen are diverted to muscles, adrenaline floods the body, and all systems that are not crucial to survival are switched off. Normally, the job of the hippocampus is to file memories so you can retrieve them later, but in times of danger, it stops filing memories, which makes it harder to gather evidence later on. Instead, the hippocampus switches to pumping cortisol. What's useful about cortisol is it stops us feeling pain, so we can focus on survival. Can anyone give me an example?
A farming accident where a man carried his own arm for a mile without feeling any pain?
Yes, excellent example. It is an evolutionary safety mechanism which is fast and instinctive. In essence, it's our body's very clever way of protecting us. To recap, an example of the 3 parts of the brain working together. You're standing at a bar. Your reptilian brain is keeping your heart beating. You're enjoying the pleasure of a nice pint with your limbic system. You're using your neocortex to work out if there's time for another before the last train. What could happen to make the amygdala kick in? What if this happened? The way you'd respond would depend not on your logical brain, but on your instinctive brain. Being glassed in a bar would be a traumatic experience. Who can give me another example of an event that can cause trauma?
War?
Rape?
A car crash?
Good, yes. Trauma occurs when a person is overwhelmed by something beyond their control. The survival brain takes over the rational brain. It can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with symptoms that last at least a month. Vicarious or secondary trauma is something you may experience if you deal with incidents such as rape or sudden death, or think of Lockerbie, Dunblane. You're not superheroes. Having a brain makes you all vulnerable to secondary trauma. It's important to understand that when trauma occurs again and again, it can become complex PTSD, such as in domestic abuse or child sexual abuse. The alarm system in the brain becomes jammed. Memories are stuck in the limbic system, so a trigger can set off the alarm. The trigger could be anything: a colour, a smell, a sound, a sensation. Now, the indicators of trauma. What should you be looking out for?
Depression. Crying a lot?
Yes, that's one response. And at the other end of the spectrum, total numbness.
Nightmares? Flashbacks?
Stress.
Good, yes. And they may feel sick. Also, shame, feelings of guilt, inability to enjoy sex, social isolation, triggers. People often feel overwhelmed by the symptoms of trauma. This can lead to using alcohol or other drugs to block out memories, or self-harm, or dissociation when a person's mind detaches from reality. Indicators can be specific to the type of trauma. Say, dental problems, when someone who was orally abused avoids going to the dentist. A victim of abuse might bond strongly to her abuser. This is known as traumatic bonding, or Stockholm syndrome. And jumbled up memory, when a person's normal recording of memories doesn't work. Can you recall any times you've seen that symptom?
What time? I don't know.
A traumatised person may not seem like her usual self, or may be hypervigilant, on edge, or being startled by everyday things. Everyone is different. You never know what impact trauma will have. Symptoms can change from day to day. So what does all this mean in practice, in your job? A traumatised person's brain is protecting them, but that normal human response of self-protection can get in the way of evidence gathering. The US military has developed new trauma-informed interviewing techniques that you can use to work around this. Research shows that if someone seems vacant, they could be distracted by their traumatic memories. Try to ground them by asking a simple, non-patronising question such as, "Are you thirsty? Do you want a glass of water?" This can help bring them back to the here and now. Don't expect a logical, linear story. Ask, "What can you recall just now?" Find out what the victim physically felt or saw. Working this way, from the instinctive sensory parts towards the logical parts of the brain, you'll get more results. In conclusion, 4 things for you to take away. Trauma response is the brain in survival mode. Repeated abuse can make trauma symptoms worse. In response to trauma, people will behave in unexpected ways. Remember, trauma is a normal human response to abnormal events.
We know that you've gone through a really painful experience, but we need to take a statement to understand what happened on Saturday night.
Are you able to tell us anything that you remember about his flat? Anything at all?
A dog barking.
Are you able to remember any physical sensations or feelings that you had?
Cigarette smoke. Can smell it now.
What was going through your mind?
I couldn't understand it. I just couldn't move or even scream.
To freeze is a perfectly normal response. So you start with the memories, you don't start at the beginning. You have to engage with our feelings to get to the facts.
Makes sense. Check you, Professor, getting all sciencey on us.
Well, if it gets us usable evidence.
There's life in the old dog yet.
Oi.
That's good. So again, I like that little video because it really explains it quite well and simply. And what we found with a number of the people that have come to see us is when they understood what happened with their brain, they could accept more that they weren't in control of the situation. And it really helped to relieve their sense of guilt and shame around it. So knowing even that little bit about, your brain takes over on what's going to protect you. So if you froze, your body did that. Your brain did that to protect you, right? You fought back, your body did that to protect you. And it really helps them move forward with, oh, I didn't know that before. So if you are eager for more training and things like that, the Brain Story is a free online training. It takes about 30 to 40 hours to work through. It's a module base. You can just type in the Brain Story. It was developed in Alberta. It's a fantastic way to give you even more information about what happens with the brain during traumatic events. So we know that traumatic events don't necessarily even have to be violent for them to be traumatic, that they violate a person's sense of self and security. That's all it has to violate. And trauma is subjective. So again, trauma to one person may not be trauma to another person. So, you hear those people, the pull them up by the bootstraps type of people that'll say, well, I went through that, that was no big deal. But how we all respond is different. We all have different resiliencies. We all have different support systems. Some of us are better at hiding things that we may be dealing with than others. So we can't judge based on that either. We need to accept people where they're at. So sexual assault is an experience of trauma, and trauma has a neurobiological impact. That is, it affects our brains and our nervous systems. For this reason, it's imperative that those working with victims, that we understand the impact of trauma so that they can process sexual assault more effectively. The impact of sexual assault depends on many factors. They include, but aren't limited to, the nature of the assault itself, how long it lasted, the extent of the physical harm, the victim's relationship to the perpetrator, whether the victim has had an earlier childhood history of abuse or neglect, and how family, friends, and others responded to the victim when they talked about the sexual assault. The sexualized nature, which is something that you were talking about earlier, of the violation of sexual assault adds a particularly traumatic aspect to the experience. In fact, being sexually assaulted or raped can be one of the most traumatizing experiences a person can go through. When the victim knows the offender, especially a person the victim believes that they should have been trustworthy and safe, and who they never believed would have violated them, the sense of betrayal is a profound element of the harm and the trauma that they experience. This only compounds the sense of shame and self-blame, along with the reluctance to disclose what happened, all of which increase trauma. Some studies have suggested that victims of sexual assault often fear that while they were being sexually violated, that they would be seriously physically harmed or even killed. The fear of death or severe physical injury is correlated with similar or more severe post-traumatic stress, like that in prolonged military combat. Even when a sexual assault occurred without a weapon, almost half of the victims in one study stated that they feared serious injury or death during the assault. So, on to the good stuff. So how we react plays a significant role in both the victim's willingness to disclose and to participate either in an investigation or to move forward on their own healing, and their ability to cope with the emotional and psychological after effects of the crime. As such, it's especially important to approach survivors from a non-judgmental perspective so as not to suggest to the victim that they were to blame in any way for the crime. Like all reported crimes, sexual assault should be initiated with the belief that the allegation is true and a thorough investigation is required to determine the facts. That's not always the response we get when people go to report, but when they come to our center, we actually don't ask them about the details of the sexual assault. We talk to them about their emotions and what they want to see happen. Like, where is it that they want to go? Many don't want to go to the police. They don't see it as a worthwhile way to go, but they're looking for something else so that they can heal and move on with their life. And reactions to sexual assault can be different between those that identify as female and those that identify as male. So women and girls, everyone can experience some sort of powerlessness or loss of control. Emotional numbness, denial, sleep disturbances are very common. Flashbacks, or when some people say they've been triggered. Guilt and self-blame, shame, loss of confidence, and low self-esteem. For men and boys, we may actually see more hostility and aggression more than tears and fears like what we see with the females. They question their own sexual identity sometimes. They act out in sexually suggestive ways, and they downplay the impact of the experience because, of course, they have to, man up, right? So a range of reaction exists, and some may carry on as if nothing happened, and others may be completely immobilized. There's no one way or right way to react. It's the only way determined by their body and their mind and their spirit. Reactions range in intensity. Some people are able to manage, others have multiple triggers. They may be smells, songs, sounds, feelings, places may become overwhelming to them. Addictions may become more pronounced or may begin following an assault, and suicidal ideation or attempts may begin or become pronounced or increase. Women who've been sexually assaulted are more than twice as likely as male victims of sexual assault to develop PTSD, and with their symptoms lasting 4 times longer. 4 times longer. Women also report greater degrees of emotional numbing, less range of feeling and avoidance responses, and experience higher levels of psychological reactivity to traumatic stimuli. Shame, blame, and attendant experience of social isolation that sexual assault victims feel create a significant barrier to receiving much needed social support. And we know during COVID, it was even more pronounced, right? Because they didn't have people. And if you don't have relatives that are supportive or people to talk to, they didn't have an outlet. People to see. So we actually saw our call volume go up significantly during COVID. The most, maybe I won't go into that because we've done a lot of that. So let's go on to the really good stuff about what our role is and what your role is. So we really put the victim in the driver's seat when they come to see us, which is, from what I've seen so far here, is that you're also doing that based on what their needs are. It seems pretty simple when we talk about just, what is it that you need? But this is their truth, this is their life, and they need to gain autonomy. So even when we want to take over and protect someone, it's really important that we let them drive. Of course, there's always those limitations when we get like a 14-year-old coming in, because it's an automatic report that we have to do to children's services, things like this that happen. But for the most part, we're really looking at what their strengths are, where they are right now, and we really let them drive where they want to go. And even with young people, of course, the very young is a different ball game than anything else. We really want to help them get to that next step, and we really want them to be the drivers of that. Just like when you're dealing with someone who's dealing with an addiction, they have to want to quit. For them to be able to deal with it, we can't force that for it to be successful. For a victim of sexualized violence, it's really about them directing where they want to go because they need to gain that control back in their life. So they need to know that they're believed. They need to know that they're safe. We talk a lot about safety and what's safe, what's a safe space for them. If it happened in their home, how can they reinvent their space so it's safe for them? To let them know that they did the right thing by showing up, by telling us what they need. To know that it wasn't their fault is a really important one. and that they did everything that they could to survive the attack. They're really strong, pretty brave for coming forward. And that they're a lot more than their abuse. A lot think that this is now, on the forehead, everyone's going to know that this is what's going to define them. It's a really important thing for them to know it doesn't define you. And life can be really good again. It may never, ever be the same. But you can have control of your life, and you can thrive, and you can do well. So response to a disclosure is really to stay calm and be matter of fact, be objective. We don't pressure the person to talk. There's sometimes long pauses of silence when people are talking, right? Or when they aren't talking, long pauses. Try to be as warm and caring as you can and avoid expressing any anger or blame, which is sometimes really hard to do. Reassure them that you believe them, and tell them we don't ask for precise answers, and we don't ask a lot of questions. We let them tell us what they want to tell us. Sometimes people hold off on coming to us because they think they have to tell us every detail about the sexual assault. Trust me, we don't want to hear every detail. You know what? All sexual assaults are egregious. They're all horrible. It doesn't matter if you were fondled or if it was done with a weapon. It's all bad. It's all horrible. We believe you, and let's move on from here. And we help them seek out the resources, because it may not be our center that's the best resource for them to come to, right? They may be more comfortable coming here to talk to someone. So how do we hook you up with who's going to help you the most? The most important words are always, I believe you. And you can also say things like, it wasn't your fault. You've been so brave and strong. Dealing with sexual assault, no matter how many years ago, is important. This is okay that you came in. A lot of people who came in when it's historical, we've had a few seniors, what happened when I was, a kid. It happened when I was in my 20s. I'm 80 now. I'm 73 now. I don't know why it's important to talk about. Maybe I shouldn't have come in. No, it's just as important today as what it was when it happened. And your mind and your body is telling you now that you need to deal with it, and that's a good thing. So good for you for coming in. So how we respond to a survivor of sexual assault is fundamental to the healing of the victim. In fact, when we know that they've been met with, I don't believe you, and other negative statements, that they tend to curl up into themselves, and we see lots of other things happen, like the PTSD really becomes pronounced. When receiving the disclosure, the most important role for each of us is to recognize the strength that it took to make that decision to ask for help and to disclose. Our natural inclination is to want to take over and protect, especially when they're young, but we can't do that. It's really about that person taking charge of their own life and regaining control of their life. Let them lead. You can give options, but we can't demand what they need to go. I remember working with youth at the YWCA, and a 16-year-old had been sexually assaulted, and the one worker said, oh, that's it. We have to go to the hospital. We have to go here. We have to go here. Stop. What does she want? Have you asked that? What would you like to see happen? I just want to tell you guys about it. Okay. Let's listen. We had someone else show up. There used to be a couple of vacant lots. They weren't vacant. There was a couple old houses that hadn't been taken down yet across from the YWCA when I was there. And, there were people hanging out in those houses. And the one woman came in, and there was literally blood just coming down her leg. And she said, oh, I've been sexually assaulted. And she was impaired. She was drunk at the time. And first response was, what would you like? I'd like to have a shower. Okay. We have showers here. Let's get you into the shower. That's okay. Had someone else find some clothes. Is it okay if we save your clothes? Would you like to go to the police or to the hospital? Nope, I don't want to do that. In fact, I want to see you throw those clothes out. Okay, we can do that. So she watched us through the clothes out. It was before Christmas. She had grandchildren. She said, I don't have any gifts for my grandkids. I said, okay, you know what? How old? We have some gifts here. We can give you some gifts. Gave her some gifts. Didn't want to go to the hospital. Didn't want to go to a doctor. Gave her something to eat. She said, I'm fine. A couple of weeks later, she came back. She said, you know what? I've gone to detox. That's what I need to do. But we let her lead. It was really important. So even though it was so awful, we thought you could catch the perpetrator in time, it was really important for her to take control of that situation. Her life mattered. Her decisions mattered. She needed to make those decisions. So it's in each of us to give our best each and every time that a survivor trusts us with the truth, each time that they reach out. And our role is critical that way. Your attitude is pinnacle to the healing of the survivor going forward. So they talked about grounding in that video, asking them if they want a glass of water. And so really helping a person connect to the present helps them to calm and to be in the here and now. There's some really, there's lots online. You can probably find 100 or more different grounding techniques to use. You do not have to be a therapist to know how to use a grounding technique. So it's anything from rubbing your feet on the floor Ask them to just rub your feet on the floor. And sometimes we have to go through 50 different exercises for them to find the one that works for them. Holding a rock or stone, like, the worry stones, used to get those all the time. Sometimes that just helps. People used to have, pieces of their baby blanket in their pocket, to calm them. Smelling essential oils, petting a pet. So sometimes you'll see people that have service dogs, right? So in the police stations and stuff like this, it's really helpful for them. Focus on breathing. So there's some breathing techniques that you can do. And even, talking about who they can talk to after hours if there's someone, if they're triggered and things like this. But there's a host of things, and we're certainly happy to get some tools together for you as well, if you'd like some. To let you know, there's 4 sexual assault serving agencies, 5 actually, in Lethbridge. We do have sort of agreements between YWCA Amethyst, which gives the third option at the hospital. So if there's a sexual assault and they go into the hospital, they're often called in so that they can talk about, you can either have the forensic kit done with the police and proceed to an investigation right now, or have the forensic kit done and we can hold the evidence for up to a year, and in that time you can make a decision on if you want to go forward with an investigation or have all your medical needs met and not have any forensics kept. And so they'll explain that. They can also give support through the court process if they want that, or support after that. Victim Services Unit out of the Lethbridge Police Services are excellent. They deal with all sorts of crimes, including sexual assault. So again, their focus is more on the police and the court support realm of that. They'll refer to us for things like they need to get into counseling or some other grounding techniques to be done. And the same thing with the VSU, with the RCMP. And then there's us as well, and not in our city, which is great. Our services, so we do crisis support management, so people can walk in, they can call us. We've had people contact us over social media. We've had school teachers bring students over because the students said, well, I'd like to talk to someone, but I want to see what it looks like first. Okay. Can we just drop by? Sure, absolutely. Come and drop by. But at that point, we're really hearing what they want. We're talking about how they're feeling, what they'd like to see happen. System navigation is sort of like the next level. So when people really need to work on what's triggering them, what may be causing them not sleeping and the rest, so we work through all the grounding techniques. System navigation also goes, it's much like what you do here with, we were talking about it earlier, Jade. If you don't know where you're going to lay your head in a week from now, you probably can't go through counseling because you're going to be worried about where you're going to live. There's no way you can focus on all the depth that they want you to think about in counseling. If you have an active addiction, sometimes that's just going to inhibit you from being able to recall things or to work on some of those other healing things that you need to do. If you don't know how you're going to feed yourself tomorrow, it's important that your belly is full, right, for you to be able to focus. We've had some people come in, taxes weren't done, they were going to be evicted from where they were living. They needed to be on AISH because there were some significant mental health issues, but can't get a family doctor. So then we're finding, the night clinic that can take them, where we can hook them up with a doctor that can do the AISH report. Women's Space Resource Center does taxes for free for women if they aren't complicated taxes. So we had a few years of taxes done for her so that she could actually get her GST credit and be a real person with your taxes being done. And then we can go over to Lethbridge Housing Authority and get you a housing allocation because now AISH is in place and this is in place. So system navigation is just that. We're helping to navigate those systems and help pull those pieces together so they can have control again on their life. We only do that at their direction and what they want to see happen. And it doesn't mean that we're housing experts. We actually go to the housing experts for those things. So we may be coming to you for, if it's for 1 or 2 days worth of food until we can get them over to the food bank for things. So there'd be things like that that we do as system navigators to help them move forward that way. For some, we had one where court has taken 3 years before it went to court. An addictions issue, things like that happening, it takes time for people to get settled and to feel good. That person will be moving on to counseling soon. Sometimes it's a one-time meeting and they're okay and they move on. Sometimes it's years for us to work on that. Police and court support. So again, if they would like us to attend the police station with them, we can actually be there in the room. We can actually give them support when they're giving their statement. We can help them get ready for court on what's going to happen in the process. We can keep in touch with the Crown Prosecutor. We can keep in touch with the police during the investigation, say, how long is this going to take? Have the interviews been done? Where are we at? Because quite often the not knowing is what's driving people crazy, right? I haven't heard anything for 6 months, like what's going on? And so it's important for us to keep touch and to do that. And also get them ready for court, because you're going to be meeting your offender at court. So we've had incidents. I mean, I said it's like going to the Lethbridge Airport, right? Like we have 2 gates. Our courthouse is pretty small too. And so the likelihood of you running into your offender when you're off to the washroom is there. And so how do we deal with that? So we'll sit in the room until they're called as a witness, and then we'll come in with them and listen to the testimony at that point. We'll watch the video statement that they did in preparation for that, because they're going to be cross-examined on that and what that cross-examination may look like. So we'll help them through that process. If requested, we'll go to the hospital or to a medical accompaniment with them. We do peer support groups, so that was something that really came out during COVID. We have about 12 different groups. We even have one that's in Spanish, because we do have a Spanish-speaking staff as well, really based on psychoeducational, so really the learning. So people come together and talk. We have a men's group, and they really do a lot of learning about what healthy relationships are, or again, about regaining things like intimacy in relationships. There's counseling. Right now it says on here, subcontracted to Lethbridge Family Services. We're actually in the position now where we're hiring our own counselor. So if you know of anyone, let me know. That'd be good. We do community education awareness. We work a lot on collaboration in the community and our outreach. And Who Do You Tell is a program that's for kindergarten to grade 6. We actually just had our first very successful one at Cardston Elementary School. And that's, again, talking with little ones about who's a safe person to tell, because it may not be their parents. And so how this happens. And so there's disclosures that come with that. But it's a really good information. So it looks like that school division is really interested in having us do more of that. And then we're part of, with ASAS that I mentioned earlier, we're part of a program called Moments Matter. And so we're trained in workplace sexual harassment. So there's a training that we're doing for the public on that. And then, of course, the Child and Youth Advocacy Center is our newest program. So just a little bit about child sexual abuse, because I know you get kids here as well. So remember earlier when I noted that the prevalence study done by ASAS, that the number of children in Alberta that were likely experiencing sexual abuse was about 325,000. If we apply the 34% rate just to the city of Lethbridge alone, we're looking at 6,800 kids that may be experiencing sexual abuse in our community. And what research tells us is if we don't address the impacts of trauma with children earlier, that they're 26 times more likely to experience homelessness at some point in their life, 30% more likely to not finish high school, 4 times more likely to be arrested during their youth, and 4 times more likely to report self-harm or suicidal ideations. So when we look at that, when they look at, we need a city Lethbridge response to homelessness, then really we should be dealing with kids' trauma. Because I can bet, and I think we've had the studies that have been done by Yale Belanger and others that show that many of the population that are homeless in our city have experienced very traumatic events at young ages. So this is why we need a Child and Youth Advocacy Center here. And I've worked in the field for a while, like I said, about 38 years. I know I look young, but yeah, not really. It's a dye job. And I know a few systems, and I know a few agencies, and I can't imagine as a parent, if your child is sexually abused, a lot of them go through a lot of guilt too. How come I didn't see it? How come we trusted that neighbor? How come this happened to my child? The pain to know that your child has gone through this is just overwhelming. Knowing the systems that I know and knowing the services I know, I don't know if I could navigate in a time of my own trauma to help my own child. I can't imagine people that aren't connected with systems. And I often equate this to if you have a senior in your life and you try to access senior services, it's a maze of things. And if you aren't strong enough to stay on that line for the 15th transfer, you'll probably hang up and give up. So if you're emotionally drained, if you've experienced trauma, chances are you're going to be able to make it through. So Child and Youth Advocacy Centers, what we know is that without a Child and Youth Advocacy Center is that parents have to navigate the systems themselves. And it's really a mess. And sometimes they aren't able to do it. But with a Child and Youth Advocacy Center, we actually can pull the players together. So we actually have what's called a multidisciplinary team. So we have Child Protective Services at the table, both from both reserves and the city. We can set up the forensic interview. We have law enforcement there. Our referrals only come from law enforcement and children's services. They're for all sexual abuse, for severe physical and severe neglect. And the ratio for that is about the top 15%. And we can actually then work on what are those support systems that are needed for that family at that time.
A Children's Advocacy Center, or CAC, provides support to victims of child abuse. Without a CAC, an abused child may have to tell their story over and over again in settings that may be scary or where kids may think that they're in trouble. Then, families have to search around for the services their children need, all on their own. But in a CAC, a child tells their story to a trained interviewer who makes the process gentle on the child and finds the facts which are crucial to the child's case. Then, a community of professionals in medicine, law enforcement and child protective services, prosecution, victim advocacy, and other heroes work through the CAC to decide the best way to help the child. And CACs provide science-backed mental health care that heals kids from trauma and helps them reclaim their futures. This community of caring professionals rallies around the child so children have everything they need, all in one place, at the CAC. To find your local CAC or to sign up for updates, visit nationalchildren'salliance.org.
So this little video is out of the States, so I just borrowed it because it's what we do across North America. It actually CAC started in Alabama about 40 years ago, which is fantastic. So many of you have probably heard of the Sheldon Kennedy Center, which is now called the Luna Center in Calgary. So that was the one that was closest to us. And so about 3 years ago, we were asked to come to the table. Actually, it was just before we opened up our doors to the Sexual Assault Center. And they had a group that had been working on it, but some of the deliverables weren't met. And they said, well, it's been married to a few other sexual assault centers in the province. Do you want to do a feasibility study? Because we need to get something done. And so that's what we did. And we see it as a match with the sexual assault centers. There's actually 5 centers that are both sexual assault centers and child and youth advocacy centers. The main goal is really to reduce trauma and increase safety for kids. So we provide early and hopefully seamless access to services throughout the region. It's nurturing support for parents and caregivers and families. So that's the non-offending family members. And so we try and keep it as a very welcoming space. We look at a brief needs assessment for the family as well on what their needs are so that we can help alleviate some of those pressures. And we use child forensic interviewers so that we can increase conviction of offenders. So part of that, what we found when we did the feasibility study, is that we had no one fully trained in child forensic interviewing south of Calgary. That was pretty frightening. Yeah, that was pretty scary for us. We also had families tell us that they were hurting financially going up to Calgary. Not everyone is in a job where they get time off for wellness days or for sick days, or that they can use their days off for their kids, right? There's still industries that say, no, your sick days for you, not for your kids. So people have to lie if their kids had the flu. Obviously, those rules are set by people who've never had children, is always what I think. But also people work in jobs like Walmart, that if they leave, they aren't getting paid. They don't get benefits. And so they were deciding between food on the table or rent being paid and care for their kid. We also had therapists. We have some great therapists in town, but we also have therapists that are scared of taking kids that are in the court process because they don't want to be called onto the stand. They don't want their service to be questioned. And of course, especially when you're an independent therapist, when you're going to court, you're losing your pay during that time, right? So there's lots of complications that came with that. So one of the things we said is that if nothing else, even if it doesn't fly, we're going to build capacity in the Southwest region, that we deserve to have services here and to have access to things here that you have in Calgary. So we brought Dr. Sarah McDonald down. So she works with the Luna Center in Calgary, and she's a trainer for forensic interviewing. So we actually trained 18 people between Children's Services. That's both Lethbridge, the Blood Tribe, Pecani, Lethbridge Police Services, Blood Tribe Police, and Tabor Police on child forensic interviewing. We've set up a peer review process, so they actually review. So some, obviously not all 18 are doing child forensic interviews, but we do have meeting times where we actually review the interview process and how it went, what could be improved. Locally, we started to look at pathways because right now we don't have a therapist in place for this program. I am in talks with someone in Calgary who hopefully will fund a therapist. And we do have someone in the wings who actually used to work at Luna that lives locally. But we looked at finding pathways into all the services in southwestern Alberta so that we can get families and kids into the services that they need and hopefully a little bit quicker. And again, we're working on having a therapist who actually is, has her doctorate and can actually work with people who are working on their provisional requirements for therapy, so she can actually upskill other therapists in the community, which is great. So knowing all we know of how children are impacted of sexual abuse or severe physical abuse or severe neglect, that this abuse can create adverse childhood experiences, which I think you've heard about, and have a tremendous impact on lifelong health, opportunity, and well-being if left unattended. Future victimization is likely, as we've talked about before, that people who were victimized as children are often victimized again as adults. There's also a delayed brain development, a lower educational attainment, and as I already stated, increased possibility of homelessness, suicidal ideation, and the list goes on. So we know if we don't take steps to address the trauma, that there is lost potential. Not sure how many of you, and I mentioned a Spotlight earlier, but one of my favorite quotes came from that. And that one chronicled the Boston Globe's work in covering the tragedy of the sexual abuse and the cover-up by the abuse by the Catholic Church. There's a line in the movie that's stated by the lawyer that's representing some of the children. And he said, "They say it takes a village to raise a child. Mark my words, it also takes a village to abuse one." This statement said it all for me. We each hold a responsibility in our society to our children to take steps to end abuse. To take, by addressing abuse and reducing impacts of trauma, we create an environment in that, we create an investment in that child's future and in our future. We can increase school success, we can reduce homelessness, we can reduce drug addiction, we can ensure a capable and vibrant workforce, and intervene in a manner that helps to reduce the potential for future abuse. So this is the work that we do at the Chinook Sexual Assault Center and the Chinook Child and Youth Advocacy Center, and I believe it's important to our community. I also believe that it's really important that we work together, and this is why your work is so critical in this community as well. So who we serve southwestern Alberta, so to the Crow's Nest Pass, down to the US border, to Tabor, up towards Nanton area. All genders, however people identify, all ages. So we've ranged from about age 3 to about age 80 that we've seen in our center. We support victims and survivors of sexual abuse, sexual assault. We also support family and other supporters. So we've had a best friend or a colleague actually reach out about someone who is experiencing workplace sexual harassment. We've had a lot of grandparents, I can tell you. I have nothing but respect for grandparents because they're coming in the droves to talk about what's gone on and how can I get help for my grandchild. So however people identify, we will meet with them where they're at. Now, how many of you have heard of Chanel Miller? It's a pretty famous case out of the States. You might remember her when she starts to talk, but this is the last little video, and you only have to listen to me for just another minute.
It happened when I was 22, on the cusp of my adulthood. When you are assaulted, an identity is given to you. It threatens to swallow up everything you plan to do and be. I became Emily Doe. Assault teaches you to shrink, makes you afraid to exist. Shame, really, can kill you. Unconscious, stupid, dumpster, swimmer, Stanford, half-naked, nameless, nobody. Nobody wants to be defined by the worst thing that's happened to them. I feared those words would follow me forever, so I did not speak. In court, the judge used words like moderate, less serious, to describe the crime. I remember the trial. The defense attorney stood before the jury and said, "Chanel knows how you get in blackouts. You drink a lot of alcohol, and that's what she did this night, and many other nights, to be honest." So I wrote a victim impact statement, 12 pages. I read it at the sentencing, straight to the man who hurt me. "You don't know me, but you've been inside me. Fingers had been jabbed inside me. My bare skin and head had been rubbing against me. Who has been irreversibly hurt behind a dumpster, waiting to figure out if I was worth something." But the judge did not hear me. When I released the statement, something else happened.
It has forever changed the way I carry myself, the way I believe. You can't be silenced.
The world breathed life into my words. I spent all this time absorbing, listening to their voices until I understood. Chanel knows how you get in blackouts. Chanel also knows how to write. And Chanel knows how to draw. Survivors will not be limited, labeled, boxed in, oppressed. We will not be isolated. We have had enough. Enough of the shame, diminishment, the disbelief, enough loneliness. Look at all this togetherness. Look out for one another. Seek whatever you wish to be in life. Speak up when they try to silence you. Stand up when they shove you down. No one gets to define you. You do. You do. My name is Chanel, and I am with you.
I love the message that she gives. So I think some of you probably now remember the case from the States in California. The judge was actually fired, which was an unprecedented move because he obviously didn't look at, it was filled with rape myths. The person who had sexually assaulted her was seen, he was the Stanford swimmer, Olympic hopeful, had his career ahead of him. She was completely discounted. And her letter, when she wrote her statement, her victim witness statement, and read it to the court, when it was released to the public, hundreds of thousands of cards and letters went in to the prosecutor's office. And it just, had a huge impact for victims across the nation. So Chanel Miller, if you read her book, it's really quite powerful. But again, her message, and it's the one that we give as well, that people aren't defined by their sexual assault, that they can move on, they can thrive, they can lead just fabulous lives and experience intimacy and love and contribute to their community, and they're worthwhile. And this isn't this one thing or this series of things that have happened to you doesn't have to define you. And so that's what we're all here for, to help people move on to that next stage in their life. So our services, we're in the professional building downtown. It's right across the street from the Alberta Treasury branch on 4th Avenue. We're on the 5th floor. Sometimes we get people, we were just giggling this morning because we get people who drop in for the Sexual Health Center as well and then look really embarrassed when they start to tell us their issues. It's like, no, not us. You're on the 3rd floor. But people can phone us. There's a toll-free number. There's also a line that's called One Line for Sexual Violence in the province of Alberta. That's done by a number of sexual assault centers. So that's 9 to 9, 365 days a week. So people can phone that one as well. They can reach out to us on social media at any time. So we're open 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. We're off on stats, but we do follow up with all the calls that we get. We have a few events coming up. So if you happen to be out at the Food and Beverage Expo, stop by our booth this weekend because we'll be doing some fundraising for the Child and Youth Advocacy Center. Run Wild is coming up. It's a virtual run that's, I think there's a physiotherapy place in Alberta that started this, but it's to support child and youth advocacy centers across the province. And then we've also been selected for Shaw Birdies for Kids. So there's donations online that actually get matched by Shaw. So we're excited about that. So we're just hoping to get our renovations done. And that's it. You've been fabulous. Thank you.